So you know how yesterday, or not yesterday, what am I talking about? A few days ago, we made a video talking about first overall pick Juraj Slafkovsky and how he missed out on the World Juniors of 2023. This was because the Montreal Canadiens decided it would have been better for him and his development to have stuck around in Montreal, but in the 9 games that he had as a member of the Canadiens, during which the Slovak team was out and about doing their thing, eventually getting eliminated by Canada, you had Slaf playing on a Montreal Canadiens team that almost lost every single game that they had played in that span. The guy only had 1 point, and he was averaging roughly 12 minutes of time on ice per game. And the reason I say it like that is because he had a lot of 12-minute games, a few 10-minute games, and a few 14-minute games as well. So it kind of works out nicely, but at the end of the day, I think it's a lot more fair to say now that Juraj Slafkovsky, with the very unfair benefit of hindsight, missed out. And if you had told me back when the World Juniors camps were being announced and the rosters were just being finalized that Slafkovsky would not make the team, or not that he wouldn't make the team, but that he wouldn't be allowed to play on the team in order for him to go 1 point in 9 games and actually play on a bad Canadiens team the whole time, I would have been like, okay, no, that's probably not the best little route and way to use his development in this 2-week span-ish. And now we have ourselves another conversation that happened on TSN 690 Sports Radio in Montreal that I thought was interesting enough to talk about here on the channel because it kind of goes over what the next step could be in this entire process here. So I'll leave a link to 2 things in the description box below. Firstly, I'll leave a link to the audio hit on TSN's website. It's available in full in a podcast form if you want to go ahead and listen to that. And what I'll also leave a link down to is the Reddit thread that we're going to be reading, because what Blaze of Glory 72 did was they summarized the entire hit made on the show. It's done by JP O'Connor, who joins Campbell and Gallo to talk about the Habs and their farm team, as well as what to do with Juraj Slafkovsky. The segment is titled, "The AHL is an Option." Here's the summary made by Blaze of Glory 72. They start out by talking about Slafkovsky and whether or not he would be a fit in Laval. O'Connor thinks he definitely would, and that Laval will be happy to have him considering their injuries. On whether or not Slafkovsky should be in Laval right now, O'Connor says that yes, he thinks he should be. A player like Slaf takes a while to develop, and you want him to be playing big and important minutes. O'Connor thinks Slaf could really benefit from time in the AHL. Then there's the argument brought up by Campbell as to whether or not an AHL goon trying to take a run at him is a concern for Montreal when it comes to setting him down, and O'Connor does not think that this should be a huge concern. The AHL isn't as dirty as people make it out to be, and with Slaf being as big as he is, he shouldn't be overly concerned about taking some body checks. Now, I'm going to stop you right there, O'Connor, because I will say that the big problem with Slafkovsky this entire season so far has been him not really keeping his head up when he makes plays, especially on the perimeter. He's gotten leveled out by guys where he really doesn't see it coming. This happened with bigger dudes, like Luke Shen, for example, but it's also happened with smaller guys, too. Marco Rossi, Shane Gostisbehere, these guys went out there and took runs at Slafkovsky, with the Marco Rossi hit being very damaging in the short term. And by short term, I mean like in the midst of that game where the hit happened. Slafkovsky, being a big guy, doesn't really mitigate him from being susceptible to hits because he's shown off at the NHL level that he can get hit just fine and get taken out really effectively by guys who are 5'9", like Marco Rossi happens to be. So this individual concern falls under the umbrella that we had already talked about. It's been discussed several times that Slafkovsky ends up taking hits with his head down, and he needs to work on that. And so AHL being the thing, I mean, I think it's a pretty reasonable concern to have, saying that the guys down there are a bit more physical. Maybe not like absolute goon territory, like this isn't that hockey league where you're guaranteed at least like 2 fights a game pretty much, but there are guys that would not dispute the idea to take a run at somebody like Slafkovsky due to the star power on his name. For the lulz, right, as they say? Let's go back over onto the thing and read it a little bit more. The next point talks about how Gallo asks why we haven't tried Slafkovsky on the top line with Suzuki and Caulfield. O'Connor points out that Suzuki and Caulfield are the most important players on the team and shouldn't really be used to develop a rookie. There is a bigger conversation happening about Suzuki, and then there's Justin Barron, stuff like that as well. What I also wanted to read was a few comments made on the Canadiens subreddit regarding this Slafkovsky AHL thing. because I really do think it brings up a good perspective that I'd kind of been alluding to in the prior video as well. A good comparable to Slafkovsky could be Mikko Rantanen. At 18, Rantanen played 9 games in the NHL, 0 points, was sent down and played the entire year in the A. Then he scored 20 goals at 19 years old and became a point-per-game player at 20. Not sure why we couldn't send Slafkovsky down. It's not like we have good players to surround him well with in the NHL. And this reply to this first thing, isn't really something that's like, it's not a tangible sort of argument, but it's one that I think, emotionally speaking, I understand a lot. Look at this one right here. I don't think the AHL is the problem, Deadly Chinchilla says. It's bearing him from the World Juniors, then sending him to the AHL for the sake of him competing against better-suited competition. If I was Slafkovsky, I'd be livid. And that's kind of the thing too, because sure, this may not be like something that holds up in court or whatever, just to make an extreme example, but if I was Slafkovsky, I'd be pretty ticked off as well. Like, the World Juniors are here, Filip Mesar's on that team, Simon Nemec is on that team, there's an opportunity to play on a Slovak squad that is actually really good, and I was prohibited from that. Because the Canadiens wanted to keep me up and play me for 12 minutes a night on games where they'd be losing a whole bunch and I'd only get 1 point in the process, only for them to send me down to the AHL because they think that my progression in the NHL isn't really going anywhere at the moment. Couldn't you have made this decision 2 weeks ago? Couldn't you have said 2 weeks ago, hey, like, you want to play in the World Juniors? Like, you can get your confidence up, you could score a whole bunch of goals, you could do this, do that. I get it, there's the conversation about bad habits. We had talked about Ed Sheeran and Steve Lacy already on the channel. We had already talked about the idea of why the Canadiens would want to keep him up, because playing against kids that are younger than all the guys he plays against in the NHL would probably serve him easier competition, thus maybe put him in a position to maybe take the game a little bit easier than he had been the past little while playing as a member of the Canadiens. And so it's a fair argument to see why they'd want to keep him up, but at the same time, if the development was going to go to this place anyway, where now we're talking about sending him down, it makes that decision to keep him from the World Juniors all the more questionable. Furthermore, there's the entire conversation as to why it just hasn't gotten done yet. At the time of recording this audio, Slafkovsky is still a Canadian. And so, if he's still a Canadian by the time this video is published, then why has he not been sent down? Here's a reply that I thought was interesting to read. Brennick says, in my opinion, Habs management and fans are against the idea of sending him down because of pride. Sending Slaf down means A, we're admitting Slafkovsky hasn't had success in the NHL, B, Shane Wright's development is ahead of ours, okay, that's kind of questionable, but C, we concede that he should have played at the World Juniors. None of those are objectively true, but I do think fans and management are too proud to let him go down. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I just don't see a legit reason not to send him to Laval, where he'll gain confidence on a more successful team. Now, aside from the Shane Wright thing, I do think it's a noteworthy conversation to have as to the Habs' pride in this situation. No, we can't send Slafkovsky down because if we do, it means that we probably should have let him go to the Worlds. No, we can't send him down because that would be admitting that playing him in the NHL hasn't really been all too successful. And I do think that the optics of a move like that would portray that sort of idea, but, I mean, pride is pride. I get that some people really value their pride, but at the end of the day, pride is not a real thing. Like, if Slafkovsky needs to play in the the AHL, then just send him down. Like, why keep him up? Playing with line mates that are admittedly not helping him develop. He's on the 4th line now. I know Richard has been very good for the Canadiens, but promoting him and demoting Slafkovsky isn't really the move in my opinion. And I also feel that being able to admit fault is part of the process of growing and learning, because if the Canadiens are able to acknowledge, okay, we probably should have sent him down, or we probably should have played him at the World Juniors, we probably should have done all this, but we decided to keep him up because pride, at the very least you have yourselves an honest assessment there. And I do think that that's important. Honesty, isn't it? Talk in the comments all your thoughts about the idea of Slafkovsky going down to the AHL, and the ideas brought up here on TSN Radio, the ideas brought up on the subreddit. Do you think it's a matter of pride why the Canadiens would not have wanted to send him down earlier, or send him to the World Juniors at the same time? Do you think it's even that big of a deal? Am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Links in the description, as I said, to the audio if you want to listen to the radio hit, as well as to the Reddit comments, because they do provide a lot of the conversation points that we had talked about in this video. But talk to the comments all your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.